All right, Gabe. Well, we have a phenomenal guest on the show today. His name is Marcus Filly. He's been a CrossFit Games competitor. He's the founder of functional bodybuilding. He really, in my opinion, has revolutionized this idea of functional and bodybuilding, i.e. the name of the company. And we talked to him today about being a father, in particular, raising two girls, and kind of how he balances those different things and what he's thinking about. I really enjoyed our conversation today. What are your kind of takeaways before we get into the show?
My first takeaway is that you made it seem like I was going to ask him all these very superficial questions he's been asked a million times on a million podcasts.
About how to build your lats? I'm
glad the conversation went the way it did. No, I mean, it was what I enjoy the most about when we have guests on the podcast is the fact that, and I try and be very intentional about this, like, these guys probably get asked the same questions on a bunch of podcasts, right? Because they're known for being CrossFit Games athletes, programming, like fitness figureheads. But with what we're trying to do with Train Hard, like, I think there's a completely new angle that I know that these guys also like are fired up to talk about and share. And that's like, that to me is super cool, because whenever we have a guest on the podcast, like, it's very busy people, like they have a lot going on. And I don't take for granted the fact that they're taking an hour of their day to jump on our show. And I think that the worst thing that we could do is ask them the same questions they've been asked multiple times by multiple people. So I really appreciated the fact that we got to dive into being a dad, his two girls, youth sports, growing up with, a sibling that has different interests and how that impacts. Like, I didn't see that going there at all. And it got me thinking about a whole bunch of things. But that's what I love about what we've been doing with guests recently, is like just trying to give them a different angle that I think they appreciate, and that I really hope people listening appreciate as well.
Yeah. If you've been a Marcus Filly fan, or even if you go back and listen to like the Rich Froning or Josh Bridges or others, I think you're going to hear a line of questions and a conversation that is not typical that you would think of those individuals, which to your point, Gabe, it's not that they don't want to talk about those things. I actually think they really want to talk about those things. It's just not the common questions they get asked about. I mean, I was waiting for you to talk about, hey, how do you refine your 6-pack ab? But we didn't get into that. So listen, to everyone out there, we really appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. This one with Marcus Filly is awesome. Sit back, pull out your notepad, hit a workout, go out for a ruck, go do something. But we hope you enjoy this episode. Let's get it. Marcus, really appreciate you being here with us today. I've been obviously following your journey for a long time with what you've been doing and transitioning between kind of bringing this CrossFit-ish to bodybuilding. I think you really were one of the first people who've really evolved that, revolutionized that. I think you've done an incredible job with it. But as of recently, like I'd say like the last year, I've been picking up on a little bit more of kind of your dad content, being a dad, being a father, being a husband. And it was just something I wanted to reach out to you and just have conversations about. I think that's something that's really important to Gabe and I, is how do we not only have conversations with ourselves, but also pull in other people. And I think what happens is in life, you get in these silos where you get in this echo chamber where you're constantly hearing the same thing from the same people, and it can start just kind of skewing your perspective. So I think learning from other people, learning from their perspectives is important, especially about all of us who have no second chances on leveling up as a dad. So that's what I want to talk about. I know Gabe probably wants to talk about like buys and tries and how he can get his lats bigger. But we have a lot to unpack, man. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. And I feel the same way. I'm in an echo chamber most days. We're all kind of living the same life. So I was excited to come on and just chat with you all about whatever topics came up. But yeah, family, parenting, husbandry, fitness, all are very, prominently featured on the day-to-day of my life.
Yeah. So laying a framework, you've been with your wife now, you've been married for like 7 years, been together since 2009. You have 2 children, and you were just sharing that were you the assistant soccer coach or were you the head coach?
I was the assistant soccer coach this year, which was, at this age, I think it just meant that I didn't keep the equipment in my car. That was the head coach's role. Yeah. But no shade to the head coach. Like, he and I are good friends, and he was awesome. He's been doing it for a few years because he's got the 3rd grader who he's been coaching for 4 years now, and then his younger daughter, who's in my daughter's class, they've bonded, and we've been on the same team for a couple of years. So yeah, they have all the gear. They know how to set it up, and they live across the street from the school, so they just bring everything over.
Perfect. Yeah, I actually texted Gabe a picture last night. I was at some batting cage with my son. Essentially what I told Gabe, and I don't know if this is true yet for you, Marcus, because your kids are a little bit younger than mine. They are, you said 6 and 4, right?
Yeah.
So mine are 12 and 9. Essentially, if I'm not working during the day, like at night, I'm either at sports, and on the weekends, you're at sports, and it just escalates tremendously. So tell me, just so, I know your daughter, she's 6. So what type of things, like at this age, what type of things are you trying to instill in her from like a sports perspective? Because she's still pretty young. So like, obviously you want her to have fun and play, but like, what is your outlook on that in terms of sportsmanship, in terms of like competitiveness? Like what are kind of some driving factors that you see, and what are you working on?
I mean, my wife and I are very much about what gets this kid to light up and just be having fun. Like soccer was, and it's been 2 years of her doing soccer. She does gymnastics. They do dance. Those are kind of their main things that they've gotten excited about. What makes it enjoyable for them. And if it's today, it's about the snacks that are happening at, halftime. Then
those orange slices, dude.
Yeah. Or whatever is coming out of the, woodwork from the other parents, like whatever is getting them happy to be there and to bond with their friends and create relationships. Like that's really all we care about. The second thing that's most important to us is just really honoring just effort and not praising doing anything particularly well outside of just the effort or the what they bring in terms of energy to something. So it's like you scored a goal, great. You missed a goal, great. Like I know that early on for me, it got instilled in my brain that love meant me being successful on the soccer field or in the sport or whatever. It was like, because I was praised for being a really good athlete, which I think is common amongst good, the better players on the teams. It's like, wow, Marcus, great job doing that. Like, you were such a good goalie. Oh my God, you scored another goal. That's so awesome. And it was like, I never got somebody being like, I loved how you worked so hard out there. I loved to see how much fun you were having. I love to see how much you helped your teammate. Like it wasn't about the effort, the camaraderie, the relationships, and even failing. Like I love to see you try so hard and miss those goals. Like that was awesome to see. And I'm really trying to lean into that with my wife and make sure that, the success, whether they won, like none of that is really why we're here, because ultimately they'll find something that they're really excited about. And competitive drive is just innate in humans. Like I don't need to promote that in somebody. Like if they find what they love and they feel rewarded for giving strong effort in something, then if they want to be competitive, they will, and it'll surface without, me sitting on the side, like, come on, Noah, get in there. Like, you gotta score a goal. Like I hear parents doing that, and it just like already breaks my fucking heart. Yeah. It's so already bad.
I heard, Gabe, I don't know what you think about that, but that's an interesting perspective that Marcus just dropped. Did you pick up on that? Like that, the like love language of an athlete, especially because Marcus, as a young kid, I imagine, because you're an athletic dude. Obviously, you have a physique of a Greek god, but you're a very athletic guy. And so as a kid, what sports did you play?
It was baseball, soccer, and golf for me.
And were you good at all of them?
Yeah. I mean, I was on the all-star team. I was on the best teams. I was the first in the league, county, all that stuff for each sport. And, it just became my identity early on, and I think not for any other reason than like, that's where praise came from in my life, was like, damn, you're really good at this. Like, way to go. Like, you're so good at the thing. And good was measured by scoring goals, hitting home runs, not, God, it looks like you're having so much fun out there. I love that you're having fun. I love that you tried something and you sucked at it. Like, none of that was ever really a topic of conversation or something that I heard that felt like, oh my God, like people want to hang out with me because I'm not because I'm the best at this, because I'm like having a good time and they want to have a good time with me. Like that's a complete game changer in terms of outlook later on in life, as I see it.
Marcus, do you think that it's possible to keep, instilling and kind of like supporting essentially being a good teammate, loving what you're doing, like having the energy in kind of like the world where we live in, where like sports are taken so seriously? Like, do you think that there's a point where, it just does become about like, all your friends are on the travel team. So you got to get on the travel team. How do you get on the travel team? You have to be good. You have to like, have the stats, have the talent. I worry as I think about a lot of these things whenever we talk to any other dads and they're kind of living it, because I have a couple of years, is how do you, because I'm on the same page, right? I think the three of us are like, those are the things that matter. Those are the things that we want to celebrate, and still hard work. Doesn't matter if you made the goal or you didn't. But how do you do that when that's almost counter to what everyone else is talking about, what the coaches are talking about, how the teams and the leagues are built, and who gets to be on the team, right? How it's structured, and just what everyone's is kind of celebrating. I don't know. How do you guys navigate that? Because I do think that it gets tougher also as kids get older, because this is going to be stuff that like, I want to be in the team that all my, quote unquote, cool friends are. And they're not on that team because they love it or they're good teammates. They're on that team because they're good at the damn sport. And I think it starts putting this pressure on it pretty early. So I'm just curious, how do you, and I know you might not be in there now because Noah's a little early, but how do you think about that and kind of continuing to have them involved in these leagues and in these groups without maybe buying into what these leagues and these groups do celebrate, which ends up being, the performance?
True, man. I feel like I've got so much to say on this because I'm just like,
we got time.
To me, I kind of wanted to just scream out like, fuck establishment, fuck the norms of what these sports leagues say is best and the way to like basically comply with their rules. It's like keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, oh, well, everyone's doing this. Oh my God, everyone believes that status is this, and therefore I have to do the status, even though it makes me feel pain inside and I hate my life, but I'm going to just keep going along with the thing. And you talk about like, well, all the cool friends or all the particular friends are on the travel team or whatever. It's like, well, wait a minute, let's back up. My kid's school has 456 people in it. The travel team's got 10. How the fuck is that everybody? It's not everybody. My wife grew up as somebody who liked sports, but she was not the elite athlete. She did not make the travel teams. Like, she rode horses and loved it. She played soccer. Did she go to college and play D1 sports? No, not at all. Like, I don't even think she made it through junior high, soccer. And she had amazing friends and people that cared about who she was, and she developed an immense capacity for empathy, early on in life, because she wasn't necessarily focused on a culture of like, well, let's just praise people that are doing great and then shit on people that didn't, God, you let that person like, I see the kids on the kindergarten soccer team are getting pissed at their friends for scoring an own goal. I'm like, this girl has been to like 3 practices this year. That's her only exposure to soccer. She kicked the ball and it went in a goal. And what the hell? Like, it's not a big deal, And I don't want to be like this parent who's like, I don't really care if anybody does well at anything. It's just all love and happiness. Like, I believe the drive to be good is something that will come out when people feel safe, secure, loved, and that they're being praised or loved for their desire and their passions rather than the outcomes of what their passions will, look like.
Well, I think what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is really insightful for me. Like, I believe that like not everybody should get a trophy. I just believe that. I think you got to win and you have to lose. You have to learn what it feels like to feel those emotions. And I don't think you're saying like everybody should be winning, blah, blah. But what you are saying is that you need to create a system early on that reinforces these habits of like love, care, hard work, effort. And then everything else will stem from that, because you'll end up, your foundation is being built at a young age, so that you're not just identifying yourself as an elite athlete. And it'd be like the same thing in like, using the CrossFit Games as an example. If I only looked at my self-worth as my performance at the CrossFit Games, right or wrong, if that was the only thing I pegged to like my identity, well, if you don't perform well, then all of a sudden it can really impact who you are. But if you're a well-rounded individual with multiple things that are going on, but you still want to win, you still want to thrive. However, that's a piece of your life, but not the only thing. I think that's the way I'm looking at this conversation. Are you looking at it a little bit differently, Marcus, or are we saying the same thing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of overlap. I think it's, and maybe another way to word it is, how do we get kids to embrace failure as a strength and as something that is more powerful than winning? Because I know for you, Jason, and for you, Gabe, and for myself, like in athletics, what made you the best person possible? What made you the best? It was not winning the game. It was, fuck, we lost. Why did I lose? Like, and rather than carrying around this like sense of guilt and shame because you didn't do well, seeing it early on for what it is a powerful tool and motivation to teach you lessons that make you a better human being overall. It is what led to hard work. It's what led to, and then, but, as a society and the leagues and the system wants to just really, really praise, the victor, the winners. Whereas, nowadays it's like you listen to, business coaches and self-help people, and it's like, you need to get out there and you need to fail. You need to try stuff and you need to fail, because failure is the best tool to grow. And we need to embrace and applaud failure. It's like we're trying to reteach these lessons in adulthood, because we had a system built when we were kids that was just like, yes, here's the trophy for being the winner. So I'm not saying that everyone deserves a trophy, but I'm like, everyone does deserve some type of trophy. The losers need a system of recognition for why that's a good thing in life. Not like, hey, you went out and you didn't try, you didn't give effort, I'm happy for you. It's like, you went out, I saw you try, I saw you gave great effort, I saw that you stumbled and you fell on your face, and you know what? I am more proud of you for that. Like, I'm so proud of you for that. And let's go out and celebrate that. Like, let me show you that, because the people need this. This is the number one thing people need. I need to feel like I can be loved, because when I am loved, I know that I am enough. And that is fundamental to every single human being. And when we work in this world of competitive sports, where it's like, you just won, I love you more, and therefore I'm enough when I win, that this is like me as a child, like this got, not for, nobody was doing this maliciously, it just kind of became a part of me. And that now, it didn't just stop at athletics. Then that carries over to business, that carries over to friendship, that carries over to fatherhood. It's like, oh my God, I did great as a dad today. Fuck, my wife loves me. People love me because I'm a good dad. And how many days are you a good dad? Hopefully a lot, but there's a shitload of days where you suck. And you're like, and so what do those days start to feel like? Fuck, I suck. Like, I feel shame because I raised my voice at my kid, or I ignored them, or I was on my phone or whatever. And like, oh man, my wife probably is just like she's just not, she doesn't love me today. Like, I'm just not enough of it. Right. And where did that come from? It came from, U12 soccer or whatever. Right. It's like, that's how I see the connection to our kids. And I'm like, man, it's so ingrained into this sports culture that I want to basically short circuit that wiring that starts so early for kids. And it happens also in classrooms too. It's like, my God, you got the A+, good job. Not like, well, I saw you work really hard on that and you got you got 5 out of 10, like, but you worked so hard. You like really, you stuck with it. Like, you tried, like, anyhow.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Gabe. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, we talked about this on a previous podcast, Marcus. And I think that, like, what you already said that I think is like the tangible takeaway for anyone listening to this, that's like, yeah, I mean, this all makes sense. Like, what do I do? It's like, you have to be involved in these sports. Like, you're coaching and you're there and you're present, not because, you know, you're celebrating and reinforcing all the things that these leagues value, but because you're bringing in this new perspective that I think is super beneficial. What we talked about in a previous podcast was like, not only do you have to be intentional about being a dad at home, but who are the coaches that are coaching your kids? Can you be involved in the teams? Can you be someone that's there and influencing the culture to move it away from this? And the really cool thing is that, like, Jason, super busy guy. Marcus, you have a lot going on. You're still finding time to go out there. You're still the assistant coach of this soccer team because you know how important it is. And I think that doesn't mean that every dad listening or mom needs to go and like be an assistant coach at their teams, but you have to be involved in some way, shape, or form. You have to know who's coaching these kids. What kind of interactions are they having? What are they promoting? What are they kind of stifling? And make decisions on, you know, what kind of teams your kids are going to be based off of that.
Well, and that's been the big transition as a parent in the last couple of years, is like, you know, going from where you're at, Gabe, with, you know, essentially a baby that you're just keeping alive between feedings, right? It's like, that's your job, to then it goes quickly. You're like, oh my gosh, there are so many social and psychological dynamics that are happening for my kid. And they're exposed to so many different types of parents and, you know, adult figures that could have a lasting impact on their life. Like, and it's happening at school. It's happening on the sports field. It's happening when they go to play dates. It's happening at the playground. And you're like, oh gosh, like I'm not just keeping them alive. Like not that I need to go in and intervene, but I need to be present and aware enough to see, this is, I want to have my finger on the pulse of these relationships and the psychological, you know, minefield that they might be walking through every single day.
Yeah. I you know, something that I'm thinking about too. So Marcus, like, I'm the assistant coach for Caden's flag football team coming up. I'm regularly engaged on every other sport he plays. He plays all kinds of sports, right? And my big thing for him right now, and because he's extremely competitive. Like he's definitely like very competitive. And I actually think it's a good thing if channeled appropriately. And I think that you're hitting the nail on the head, and you shine some good light. I mean, I think you're just playing on your previous experiences, right? I didn't have the same experiences that you had. I didn't, as a kid. Like, I was not essentially like the love was not a factor of how well I performed, because I raised BMX bikes, and whether I won the championship or I didn't, it really was irrelevant to my parents. Like, it was just unengaged. Like they didn't care about sports like that. So I almost had like the complete opposite potentially. Right. But I think for me, it's like, if I know that I'm seeing these signs that Caden's super competitive, or that Ava really wants to win, or whatever, what could I do to lay a framework of like, what is success for this, for this season? So what I try and do with Caden is I'm like, hey, I'm just letting you know, success for this season was last season, was developing your sportsmanship. Like, that's all I care about. So if I see good sportsmanship, like, that's all I care about. And so that was like our focus for last season, because I feel like that was what we need to work on as a family, right? This season, maybe it'll be different. I got to think about what I'm seeing and how I could correct it. But it's like, I tried to focus on that, and it really made an impact as far as I was concerned, because he knew whether it was winning or losing, it was almost irrelevant to me, because all I was looking at from success or failure on that particular sport for that particular season was sportsmanship. So that's one of the things I've instilled that I think has worked pretty well, at least for him.
I know. And I think, to that, like, look, like I said, I believe competitiveness will shine through without the help and, you know, encouragement or the need for it from a parent. And if it does, then that's fantastic. That's who that child is. And I don't want to like stifle that. I want to foster it. I think how I would approach that too, if my kids show a competitiveness towards something, is I would help them really get focused on what are the traits that make you more successful in this competitive landscape that you want to, you know, rather than focusing on the outcomes. It's like, let's get our kids more focused on the inputs. You know, what are the inputs that make
are in their control?
Like, and sportsmanship is one of them. It's like a great, you know, not that all the best athletes in every sport were always the best, they had the best sportsmanships, but many did. And they're the ones that people generally tended to love and respect and care about more than like, oh man, he was good, but he was an asshole. Like, I don't really like, or she or whoever, so yeah, it's just helping them focus on what inputs they can control that will lead to success. And, that's another part of the sports process that I'm really interested in is the physical inputs to all of them, right? Because now my life, I think probably in high school and then definitely in college, like sports, it was so crystal clear to me that sports were just this conduit for me to be a physically active person and explore really my body and fitness and what it could do, and keep moving. And I think that that's something that I'm really, really interested to have, like, play a guiding role for my kids and other kids is like, look, it's great to be good at a sport, but ultimately you need to move for the rest of your life. And you may not be playing organized baseball or organized football, well into your 20s. You probably won't, I mean, I look around and all the moms and dads in their 30s and 40s, like, who's actually playing any sports? Very few. And how many are moving their bodies? Not a lot, not enough. And it's sad. It's like, okay, so all that, you talk about your heyday as this kind of athlete, or you play this sport growing up. How did that foster a deep appreciation for movement and your body, and then using that like for the rest of your life? And that's something that I when I see, our kids are playing, are in gymnastics, and it's constant movement, it's constant body awareness. It's, or they're in hip hop dance and there's a lot of movement, and then there's soccer, and maybe there's, at this age, like there's a lot of standing around. There's a lot of, looking at the, ladybugs over there and picking grass. And I'm like, and not that that's bad, because they need to build relationships. They need to get exposure. But I'm like, okay, how do we just get them excited about movement? And I see it in my kids with gymnastics. It's like, what are they doing on the soccer field at 4 and 6 years old? They're practicing cartwheels because they just want to move, like, and I'm like, okay, well, let me keep that in mind as I start to see this develop more and more and more in different sports. Is what draws this connection between, sports are placed to build relationships, learn, build character, maybe learn a little bit of like what it's like to win and lose. Like there's value to that, because those are going to happen in life. How do we support both sides of that? But also just move your body, like be inside of your physical being, because, we're going to work on your emotional and mental and spiritual health for a long time, but your physical health is like your rock. It's your foundation, that which a lot of those other things are built upon. And I want it to be as strong and robust for as long as possible, and that starts with like making those connections between, like, gymnastics is you becoming strong and becoming, connected to your body. And I love seeing that when they get excited about, Daddy, watch, I almost got the splits. I'm like, that's freaking rad. Or my daughter 6 is, cranking out pull-ups in the garage, because she's like learned, that's something that the gymnasts do. And she's like, I can do this too. I want to do that, what you're doing. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah. It's awesome, man. It's so interesting because it's such a good point, right? Like you can take sports so seriously in your youth, and a lot of those people, most of those people end up just not moving in the future. And it's so crazy, some of the stories you hear now about how seriously they take like single sports too. And me and Jason have talked about this in the past, but how that could be one of the not most, obviously it's better to move in some way, shape, or form, but like getting your kid all in on baseball from like a super early age is not going to be as productive to their overall like health, athleticism. Even some people would argue performance in baseball, to like just do that from an early age. They should be doing soccer and gymnastics and all these other things, because they'll learn and establish such a great foundation that can then get them to the point. Like you hear stories of, kids as young as, in their early teens getting Tommy John surgery now, because, the repaired elbow will be stronger than a fresh elbow. So then they'll be less likely to get injured through like high school and college, which are important years.
They're doing this preventatively. They're not like, it's not an injury. They're just getting the surgery.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
Oh, man.
it's
Marcus, how about
crazy,
the red shirt theory? Dude?
crazy stuff, man.
Have you
Oh
heard
yeah,
about
the red shirt theory.
Dude, the red shirt theory is a real thing, man. People are doing eighth grade twice or staying home before going to high school so that they're a year older, especially now because of college sports and the ability to get paid in college. It makes a difference, especially if you're a young man. A year is an eternity when you're a young man.
Yeah, a year bigger,
Wow.
a year stronger. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's unfortunate because, like you said, the hope there is that they'll maybe end up playing professionally. This will be the thing they do for the rest of their life. It'll, change your life for the better. But what percentage of these kids are actually getting there versus the percentage that are putting, all their eggs in this basket at the sacrifice and detriment of their long-term health, long-term movement, enjoying other things, so on and so forth. And then they get to this point where it's like, all right, I didn't make it on this path. Now I'm on this path, but I'm like, 10 steps behind where I could have been if you took a more balanced approach.
Whew, man. Well, I don't have much to comment on that outside of that's
insane.
It's insane, but it's also, going back to what the question you asked me, Gabe, like, how do you, if this is the way the system's set up, like, this is what the competitive leagues and this is the culture of them. And, how do you approach that? Cause you don't want your kid to miss out. It's almost like, miss out on what? Miss out on wanting to get Tommy John surgery when they're freaking 13 right. And, taking eighth grade twice or taking a year off when all their friends started high school, but they're going to get held back so that they have a chance.
That one's tough.
I mean, that blows my mind. But so it's, I think it's just when we actually, I had my therapist, that I see every other week. We were in a discussion recently where I was like trying to make a pretty big decision or something that felt like a big decision to me. And I think I said something like, gosh, but I'm afraid to like lose connection with reality. So that was like the words that came out of my mouth. And he was like, what? He's like, I want to push back on that. It's like, what's the reality that you're afraid of being disconnected with? Like, from what you've shared with me, you're living a hard reality right now. This thing that is like, you want to change, like you want to change something because your lived reality now is scaring the fuck out of you. And you're scared to go change it because you don't want to lose touch with reality. It's like, you don't want your kid to miss out on the reality of what this system looks like, but the system is producing a totally fucked up reality for so many people. You're like, wait, why do I want my kid to not miss out on the thing that is making that the system itself is getting people Tommy John surgery at 13 preventatively or to ensure a better outcome down the road? It's like, or, oh, wow, wait a minute. Yeah, it's actually okay if my kid misses out on that thing because the outcomes of that thing, that system, the culture of the competitive league might actually be pretty broken, and rather than like work to keep them involved because that's what everyone's doing and that's the current of life. It's like, maybe we got to really stand up and take some different approaches or,
viewpoints on it or
risk missing out on the thing that, might actually not be what we hoped it would be for them.
Exactly. I just want to make my like a quick point on this because I'm like fully in it, right? Like I'm in it. Like my 9-year-old is playing travel ball. Like my 12-year-old is doing travel volleyball. So I'm in it. And one thing that I do want to say is like, as a parent, you've got to be aware, right? You have to be aware. You have to balance what my children want versus what they need versus what society wants them or needs. Like you got to start balancing these things. Like for me, my son gets a lot out of structure and he needs movement and he needs that discipline. Like he needs those things in his life. And I provide it to him in certain ways. But like Caden, if he had it his way, every day he would go from school to practice. He would want a strong figure to be telling him how to perform better. and he would want to make connections with other people who feel that same way. Like that's important to him.
That's beautiful, man.
Like versus my daughter is a little bit different, but I think just being aware of those things and then not getting too wrapped up. So for example, like with travel baseball, it can become like a really big thing. But then all of a sudden, if you're not playing other things, maybe you're not fostering other connections, learning other sports are a little bit more team-based versus individual up at the plate, for example. So like, anyways, I'm just trying to balance these things about what they want, right? And the benefits that come with it, right? Like you're saying, like these realities, right? Like the reality is if you're on a travel team, you could also foster a lot of relationships. Like one of the things that we're going through is like in my daughter's class, there's 25 students, 12 of them are girls. They've been together for years. And so what is the likelihood of her fostering strong relationships with 12 girls in 7th grade, right? And how do we provide her opportunities to make other friends outside of that small class? One way to do that is club volleyball. So like, I'm just giving you other whys to why I think some of these things are really powerful, you know?
No, I appreciate that perspective too. And I love what you said, which is like, this question of, I think a lot of parents, it's easy to sort of take your own stories and your own history and your own perception of how this stuff is, playing out and be like, okay, this is what I think my kid needs. And you try and steer them rather than like, just be aware of what's out there, listen to what, and really be reflective on like, this is what my kid wants. This is what my kid actually needs because I'm listening to them and I'm actually connected to their development. And then, okay, how can I give my child what they need, in this kind of environment, this community, this culture, this society that we're surrounded by that has sort of rules that are there from, centuries of, evolution in this modern world. Like, how do I help them get there and not just like assume that it's going to be okay, that, okay, yeah, they want structure. They want to play a sport. Cool. I'll just put them in this thing and whoever's running it's going to do a good job because, they must care. It's like, well, don't make that assumption.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you just saying?
Well, I was just going to put a pin into the Tommy John surgery thing, because even as I was saying it out loud, I was like, they can't be right. But it is indeed right that now, and this article is actually from 2015, the majority, 57% of Tommy John surgeries are teens 15 to 19. And that surgery rate has been going up 9% per year. And it is that they're doing preventatively in that they'll hurt their elbow, but they'll hurt their elbow in a way where in the past, it's just like, just rest it, do some of this stuff, like it'll be fine. But instead they're just like, let's just repair it. And, usually it strengthens it a little bit. And the article even goes into like, there's a lot of long-term concerns of like, it'll change the feeling and how your hand and like entire arm works, because you're replacing a ligament so early in their age when they're still very much developing. So the stat is true and it's crazy. But even as I was saying it out loud, I was like, this can't be right, but it is indeed right, which is unfortunate.
Check. Nice job.
Yeah.
Dude,
but I have a question for both of you based on some of the stuff you were just saying. And Jason, you allude to this a lot, but how do you balance, especially once you have more than one kid, having very different, like big differences in like what they're interested in? And I think that like naturally one is going to be more aligned with what you're just genuinely interested in, right? Like, I think that the three of us here really value training, played sports, love sports. So that's something that like we'll just naturally be excited about. How do you balance another kid having other interests that you still want to obviously support? Because I know that none of us three here are going to be like, hey, this is what I want you to do. And that's that, right? Like we want to support whatever they want to do. How do you figure out being as enthusiastic about some of the things that maybe aren't naturally something you're interested in, to make sure that it never feels like, well, this is my sports kid and this is my other kid, and never letting that be something that, can even like come into their mind? Because I know that I wouldn't want that. And I know that neither of you would want that either.
Do your kids have different, Marcus, do your children already show a difference in like what they're interested in at this age, or are they still too young?
I think they're starting to show that like it's creeping up a little bit, but our younger really just wants to do what her older sister's doing in a lot of ways. But I mean, gosh, I've thought about that a lot because my brother, when I grew up, and but I have two brothers, but one that's like very close in age, the other one that was about 15 years older than me, half brother. Mm. So the closer one in age, like we were very different humans, like to almost every character trait there was. Like he got exposed to some sports, but like he was not the sports guy. Like he didn't fall in love with training. He was a much more social person than I was. He wanted to go on the month-long, summer outdoor, adventure camp, sleepaway camp. I didn't want to go anywhere near that. I was like, I want to be close to my parents. Like, send me to a week-long sports camp. That's enough for me. He was artistic, would draw, really creative. I was like, give me a science and math book and I'm going to be happy, so we just had a lot of differences, and not that like one of us, or my parents, like, I think my dad and I shared a passion for golf. And so I got to spend a tremendous amount of time with my dad on the golf course, which I know was not something that my brother got to spend a lot of time doing with him. And it wasn't like him favoring me. It just, it was easy for my dad to feel a commonality and spend time and be in a physical space with me because of that. He also loved to come to my like sports events and support me, but there wasn't that kind of sport event for my brother for him to go. And I mean, not as many, it was like for every 10 games I had, my brother had one game, growing up. And then I was on the travel team, and because we had committed to that, we had to travel all around the Bay Area and throughout Northern California for most of my youth. And can't just leave my brother at home. Like, he's got to come along. So it's like he's sort of tagging along to these big things. Like, I never went to, Morgan Hill or Fresno to like cheer for my brother at a soccer game. That just wasn't part of my childhood. And so, and how did that play out for him in his life? Or how did that play out for me in my life? What did that do? I'm not entirely sure, but it's something that I want to be really mindful of with my kids. And yeah, I'd love for them to be interested in some of the same things, and especially whenever there's opportunities to like, as a family, support them both equally in something. Right now it's gymnastics and dance. Like, they both love to do that. They're both in the same dance class. This is a win, but at some point it's probably going to diverge. And just having that awareness of like, I don't want to make it clear or obvious or in any way perceive that I appreciate this child more because they happen to be interested in what I'm interested in. It's going to be an opportunity for me to sort of expand what my interests are. And it already is. Like, I don't particularly love to like, I'm not like a hip hop dance guy, but I'm going to try and get into it. I'm not a big, I'm not like, my wife recently just took up singing in a band. And like, this has become a big, part of the family is like singing, rehearsing lyrics, like, and I'm like, we got a karaoke machine. I'm just like, okay, like, this isn't really what I'm into, but I gotta, this is an opportunity for me to expand myself. And, this could be a way to show some real love and care and commitment to everybody in the family.
Dude, that's a really interesting. I can't wait to see some videos of you hip hop dancing and doing karaoke. But I think it's the whole idea of like, kind of taking a step back and like kind of thinking through different lenses. So like, for example, it's really easy with the sports to get wrapped up. I was thinking about it as a kid, and I just thought about this because Caden brought home like a little trophy, right? He puts it in his room. And I was thinking as a kid, where did I put my trophies? And I hadn't thought about it until I really thought about it. When I was racing BMX, they give you a trophy for anything. Like, it was like, if you like in BMX, especially on the national circuit, like, dude, you'd get these giant ass trophies that are like as tall as like a small kid. And I put them on the piano in the family room. And I didn't think about it until later on in life, but like those trophies do not belong in the family room on a piano because it celebrated me too much. It should have been in my own room, a private thing. And those are things that I'm thinking about. Like, how do you celebrate wins, each one, but make sure they each have their own lanes of things they're interested in? So like, for example, Ava loves to bake, and it's like, how can I get more involved in that? or do other things like plays? How can I get more involved in that? Because they are completely different kids. But I think just having that awareness, I think, is important. Like you were sharing with your brother, like even like a travel. I hadn't thought about that until now. But like if we're traveling all the time, how do you make that experience not just about him, but make it like a family thing? Otherwise, it's just like him, and not like that connection, right? And just I think having that awareness, I think, is really important. And it goes vice versa, right? Like we've had to kind of balance that with Ava being sick. Obviously, we kind of had the opposite shift, right? That was a different shift for us, which was needed at the time and whatnot. But yeah, I think having that awareness, I think, is key. So thanks for asking that question, Gabe. I think that's a really good one, by the way.
Yeah,
man,
absolutely.
And as you were talking about you and your brother, Marcus, man, I was like, shit, because I haven't thought about it that way, but I mean, it was the same thing, growing up with my little sister. We always traveled for my swim meets, and it was always like her in the stands, like rooting us on. And again, like how that impacted her life, impacted my life. Like I don't know either, but it is really interesting to think back on how stark of a different experience that is, and trying to at least be mindful of whether that's happening. Because I don't think it's as simple as saying that that's bad for child B or good for child A. I think it's just something that you have to be mindful of, because it is different. It's incredibly different. And trying to give that level of attention to both, even when it's very different events or different interests. And I love hearing that you're doing, the hip hop dancing and stuff that I know wouldn't be like a normal, like, hey, Marcus Philly interest, but if it's a family interest, it's our interest as dads. Like it has to be. That's kind of our role in the family, is to never stifle something that is naturally firing up our kids. So love and appreciate you sharing that, man. That was really cool.
I think one more thing I can share about this is that, my experience growing up was one that I think instilled in me just sort of like, yeah, for better, for worse, just sort of a self-centeredness. Like, okay, like we made a lot of sacrifices for my sports, for, my travel, for the things that I was interested in that were time consuming for the whole family. And that became a little bit of my worldview, is like, okay, I'm the center and then everything else is around me. And I think that I think thankfully it didn't, stifle my ability to, connect with empathy and to see others for, what their lived experience is. But it made it a bit harder, and I missed a lot of that. And I think my marriage and my relationship to my wife, and now being a dad, has really highlighted, like, oh, this is something that I need to relearn as a human. It's like, it's not just Marcus with like Noah, Joey, and Megan like circling around. It's like we all have to have a place, and we have importance in this family, and each of us has our own lived experience that deserves room and attention and space. And how do we get our kids to really appreciate that too? Like, my wife is she's a therapist. She is one of the most empathic people I've ever met. She's so outwardly focused on like, how is everybody else's lived experience around me? How is everybody else feeling in this room? Like, and that's part of how she grew up, and her experience as a child that made that such a high priority. And her mission is like, how do we teach that to our kids? Like, if our kids, what's going to be a successful childhood experience? What defines success in preschool, in TK, in kindergarten, and first grade? It's if they can look at their friends and truly empathize with them and connect with them and care for them. She's like, then we're building and we're raising great kids. And, when they get the report card or the message from we get the message from a teacher that your kids like really are aware of their friends' feelings. They check in with them. They are like, that's when it's like, wow, we won. And something like making sure that all of our weekend events are equally, everybody gets an equal distribution of attention and focus. If we go on a travel soccer game to Fresno with Noah, then like, hey, Joey, what do we want? What are we going to do for Joey today? Like, how are we going to turn the focus on her? What is her desire on the Saturday? Because we just had to go do this on Sunday. And it's like, and then really get Noah to spend, turn her attention towards her sister. Like, hey, we just did this great thing. Like, it's Joey's turn today. It's Joey's day. Like, how can we make it special for her? And, whatever behaviors or whatever routines and rituals that we can create as a family to foster that is, the world is lonely enough for people. We want to foster more connections with humans. And it starts early. If you just believe that everything's about you and that the whole world revolves around you, it's much more easy to sink into loneliness as a young adult, as an adult later in life, especially when things get more complicated and there's stress and there's pressures that show up when you're an adult that you don't have as a kid. So it's like, and what do we want people to do when they're stressed out and they're depressed and they're feeling anxious as adults and they're under the gun? It's like you want them to reach out to people and connect with other humans, but their lived experience up until that point in life is like, well, it's all on me. Everything was focused on me. I got to figure this out myself. I'm going to go inward. I'm going to be alone. And it's like we have the power to like potentially foster a different type of worldview where it's like, it's not just me. I'm connected to all these people around me, and that my happiness could be, so impacted by just in turning the spotlight from me and just turning it on to somebody else.
Dude, that's one of the things I think that CrossFit did a good job of, is connecting like-minded people in an environment of shared suffering where you don't feel like you're alone through some of these things. Then you create these bonds. Like right now, we're doing these Train Hard Men's Club, and we meet up like once a week. We just throw down as a group of guys. And exactly what you're talking about is like what we're trying to foster is this idea of like, empathy. Like, hey, how are you doing? And all of a sudden you just have a conversation. It's like, wow. But I like what you're talking about fostering this early so that it's ingrained in you that it's okay to like, check in with others, and you're checking in like it's a community impact versus like a solo flow. And I think as society, right, if you look back generations and generations, it was more of like a tribal community, right? Because each person had to connect with the other, whatever. Now, as we've gotten more connected, we've actually gotten less connected because of internet and whatnot. So I think what you're doing is you're almost fostering like this sense of tribe at an early age, that as they get older, they're still leaning on those experiences. If that makes sense. Though that's the way I'm taking it as that's the way I'm hearing it.
No, I like the way you articulated that. That's awesome.
One kind of like last thing I definitely wanted to get to and get your take.
You want to talk about bodybuilding or what?
No. I think these topics are so much more interesting. I don't know why Jason thought that I was going to ask just questions about bodybuilding. No. I think totally there's plenty. Joking. Marcus has plenty of that content out, and you guys can go find it if you want. This is so much more interesting. But one thing that me and Jason have been talking about recently, and it ties into a lot of what we've talked about with kids, and I think it applies very much now with adults and dads and just people trying to move their body, is there's a lot of like, especially with the new year coming up, there's a lot of talk about like, discipline and motivation. You got to get it done. You got to get in there. You got to get in the gym. You got to move your body. But I think like the key that the three of us, I think would agree have found is that like we enjoy training. Like we love it, right? It's like a part of like, I can't start my day without moving my body. Like I feel so much better after I get my workout. I know Jason feels the same. Marcus, I know you love it as well. How do people find that joy in doing something that is so important for them to do long term? And the reason that I ask this is because everyone is going to start the new year moving their body. Not everyone, most people moving more than they did before, right? Like that motivation is infectious. There's something about like clean slate, new year. It just gets you want to like download some app, like get on a program, go to the gym, but it always fizzles. And I think it always fizzles for a lot of people because there isn't that genuine, like, this is something that lights me up. Like I can't go about my day at 100% if I didn't work out to start. Mm-hmm. What is something that like could help people get closer to that instead of it just being this thing of like, I hate it, but I know I have to do it. So it's just something I'm going to check off the list. because I think that always works for just a certain amount of time. And then it just can't, because you can't keep, white knuckling through these things. You have to make it something that like you, to some extent, enjoy.
Yeah.
Just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish I had the magic answer for that. I mean, two things come to mind. Since we're on the topic of raising children, I think it's, you have a much better chance at doing that early on in life to instill some type of love and passion for movement, just through repeated exposure. And then, finding ways to just drop subtle connections to, a kid's happiness and their fond memories that were connected to movement and doing things. And of course, seeing your parents do it as young kids is really extremely powerful, and creating behaviors that will last a long time, or at least values that will last. And the other part of me was listening to what you're saying, and it was like I had this kind of like almost like a David Goggins like mindset where it was like, you don't have to fucking like it, you just got to do it. Like there's unfortunately, the life is not, life is not set up in a way where we have to do anything physically active to survive and to live into old age. Like you can get by with doing nothing. I'm not saying it's going to be a really high quality life, but you can age into your 70s and 80s without ever really moving, And so the survival instinct to move has been stripped away from everybody. We don't have that. And I don't know that we really evolved in such a way where, movement in and of itself was like this, like, behavior that you're like, oh, if I move, I'm going to feel better and it's going to be better for my survival. Movement was a tool to reap the rewards on the other end, which was food. And then food was this massive, dopamine rush that you're like, okay, I got to keep doing that. This is my survival. So movement was a means to an end, not like the thing that people woke up and were like, you know what? I feel like going and picking up some rocks today. Like pick up the rock if you have to build a shelter. And I heard like this guy that wrote this book, I think it's called Exercising or something like that. But he like basically looked at, did this sort of anthropology sort of, look over human history and movement, and, talking to like hunter-gatherer tribes, like modern day hunter-gatherer tribes, and trying to talk to them about like this concept of movement and exercise. And they don't even have words for that in their culture. They don't even have it in their language. They're like, what is exercise? Like,
right.
Why would I go and do this? Why would I go and if I didn't have
additional energy?
Yeah. Why would I do that?
That?
It's not enjoyable. There's nothing really great about it. So we're trying to like hack our way through this fundamental flaw that's in modern society, which is we don't have to move for any particular reason. And so that's where what you're saying becomes a tool that in the health and fitness community we try and use, which is like, how do you make this more enjoyable? What is enjoyable about movement? And the enjoyment of movement comes from doing it repeatedly many, many times and seeing the positive impact that it has later on for most people. It's not like I loved going the first time and struggling to lift weights. Like that isn't that exciting for a lot of people. And like going out and playing, the other thing was like, I hear so many, parents talk about this who I meet, and they see that I'm into fitness, and then, and they say like, well, I never really got into like working out, but I love sports. And I'm like, great. How many freaking sports are you playing right now? Like, are you playing sports 3 to 4 times a week, like in a structured routine way? Like, why are you waiting on that to be the thing that's going to get you back moving? You cannot. It's not going to work. And so, yeah, I'm not saying you shouldn't try and seek out like sports and go play pickleball once a week and get into that. Like, please, by all means. But perhaps it's like changing. It's a mindset shift of, movement has to be super enjoyable and fun. Whereas no, it has to be something that you do routinely, and let's help people understand what the minimum effective dose of movement is to sort of check the box. It's like, I don't love flossing my teeth, but I know 2 minutes or a minute of flossing my teeth a day is like super impactful. If somebody was like telling me like, you got to floss your teeth 5 times a day for 10 minutes each, and that's what's going to get you the best, you're like, well, forget that. And that's kind of what we've done as a fitness culture
100%,
has been
100%.
Like, yo, if you want to get in shape, you got to go train 5 days a week. You got to do 75 hard. You got to do 2 workouts, 45 minutes a day. One's got to be outside. You got to eat this. And you're like, people are like, fuck that. It's like, no, you just got to go for a walk, and you got to do full body resistance training 3 days a week. And it can be for 45 minutes. And this is how you do it. And each week you get a little bit harder. And, you just simplify things down for people so that they realize that they got to floss their teeth, but it's only going to take a minute, to make something measurable. And don't undersell like, hey, if you just like walk for 5 minutes a day and, you're going to be fine. It's like, don't lie to somebody being like, if you just floss in between the front 2 teeth, you're fine. You don't need to do the rest of them. That's a lie. Just like telling somebody they got to floss 10 minutes a day, 3 times for 30 minutes. That's also a lie. You don't have to do the super complicated training fitness program with the like highly regimented restrictive diet and, take a cold shower 4 times a day. And then, right. It's like
4 times a day for sure. Well,
obviously
cold plunging 4 times a day and sauna at the same time.
Yeah. Put your cold plunge in the sauna and just jumping in and out.
Yeah. No, I like what you're saying, man. I appreciate, one thing to think about from like a, like evolutionary perspective is that's a really good thing to understand. Like, why would a traditional person today, because to your point, if you can get into your 70s, 80s and not really have to do much movement, really, because we have all these modern day benefits, right? But if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, the dopamine, the release, the feeling of good, it came, physicality and exercise really came from like having to protect themselves, like run, jump, climb, etc., and or hunt for food or go get water or whatever. Like that was just like their thing. It wasn't like exercise was built in as this evolutionary component that made them feel better, right? That's an interesting take on it, because I mean, I look at exercise as it does make me feel better, right? I'm a different person when I'm done with that. But I think that we have to re-engage the people who are out of the mix and let them know that it's not as big of a gap from where they're at today to where they need to go. I think that's really important. I think that we've just gotten so fixated on all these hacks. And it's like, dude, like I saw a video you put up of like just rucking. I mean, bro, come on. Like you ruck for 30 minutes on a call, like you're winning. And then you add in some resistance training. Yeah, I hope that for someone listening, I know most people listening to this podcast are probably working out regularly. But if you're not, and you're listening to this right now, right? And you maybe found this podcast because of the Jocko pod, whatever, right? And you don't exercise as often. Whoever knows how you found this podcast. Dude, start off weighted walking. You could just do that on a regular basis, add in some basic resistance training and like do that repeatedly for a long period of time. And you're going to be fitter than most people on the planet. It's not that complicated, but I think we put it up on a pedestal for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
The flossing analogy is so good.
Flossing analogy is excellent. I'm stealing that.
That's the first time I've ever pulled that one out. But yeah, no, we sometimes, I think it's important to just start acknowledging just how fundamentally different our way of life is today relative to how our biology is structured. Yeah. And that is, if we can appreciate that, we get more people to appreciate it. We stop asking the questions of like, why can't I seem to do this? It's like, you can't do it because, you're it's like you're an Apple operating system inside of an IBM computer. That's what you are. Like, it just doesn't work. Like our operating systems that we evolved are in weirdo land. Like we're in a totally different world. And so things don't work so naturally. Right. And, when you said like, I feel great when I exercise, I get the endorphins, I get the dopamine. It's like, and if you just spent a day being as physically active as somebody would need to be in order to survive without, a grocery store and a car and, a shelter, then you would get all of the same physical benefits, without having to force yourself to go do it and create structure. So, if somebody's looking for, hey, how do I manufacture that like kind of natural movement flow to my life? It's like, well, you could go back to being in kindergarten where you just ran around and jumped on the playground and climbed on the monkey bars. Like I see it happening for my kids right now. It's like they naturally are just doing the thing because we drop them at school and that's how it's structured. But that structure stops very soon where it's like sit in your desk, do more homework. It's not cool to be like swinging on the monkey bars anymore because that's for the little kids. And we go over here, we just stand in circles and talk, or we start looking at our phones instead. We're talking God, like that naturalness of movement built into our kids' lives is like it then stops. And then now you got a lifetime to basically either wishfully think that you're going to get back to just like, oh, movement's just easy to do and it's just fun and I just enjoy it all the time. Or it's like, nope, we kind of have to structure it, and that's the trade-off of being in the modern day with modern day comforts and still not letting your body deteriorate into a decrepit, vessel that just isn't going to support a healthy lifespan.
Hey, we're getting knowledge bombs dropped from Marcus today.
Oh,
dude.
man.
I really appreciate your time. I feel like, I want to be sensitive of your time today, but I feel like we should talk again on other additional subjects, but I think this one was really valuable, especially you pulling in some of your background as a kid. I think that we could all kind of look at our, lens. And I think that our parents all did the best they could with what they had. I think they all tried to do the best they could. But the question becomes like from us as younger parents, like what could we do to take that 10% better? And then the next generation, hopefully they take it 10% better. Right. And that's the goal, is this leapfrog effect to just create more optimization in terms of like what we could do and, from health and et cetera. So dude, I really appreciate your time. I mean, Gabe, any final, questions for Marcus before we let the guy get on with his day and go crush whatever else he has planned?
No, but we definitely have to do this again. I really appreciate you coming on, Marcus. Make sure, let people know where they can find you, how they can interact with what you have going on. Make sure to include that. But I appreciate you coming on, man. That was a fun one.
No, I appreciate it too. And I'm happy that the conversation went the way it did. And I love that sentiment, Jason, of, my parents did a phenomenal job and they did the best that they could. And were there mistakes that they made? Yeah. Did they know they were making them? No. And that's where it's like, I have whatever success and whatever scars I have in my life. They played a big part in all of it and I'm thankful for it. And I'm going to upgrade what I'm doing with my children and they're going to upgrade what they're doing with their children because my kids are going to grow up and they're going to be in their 20s and they're going to have a phase where they're like, fucking dad, why did you do this to me?
Right.
Which
Right.
it makes me kind of get choked up and tear up because I'm like, God, yeah, it's like, it's an inevitable part of life where it's like, I'm going to do the best that I can and I'm still not going to be perfect. And that's okay because this is part of our journey through life. And one day none of it's going to matter anyway. So, let's not overwhelm ourselves and just think like, I can do this thing exactly the right way, perfectly, but let's just stay connected with other, our peers and learn from each other, have conversations like this, upgrade what we're doing, bring more awareness. Maybe somebody listening today heard something about, youth sports and, how they might parent or how you've chosen to parent, Jason, or how I'm looking at things. And maybe that just opens their eyes to like, oh yeah, like maybe my kid needs a little bit more of that attention, or maybe I haven't thought of it that way. And hey, that happens when we get together, we have meaningful conversations, we respect each other's opinions. I listen to questions that you're asking, Gabe, and things that you're posing, and it's getting me to think, okay, yeah, maybe I maybe I'm a little too fixed in my belief of that. So anyway, I appreciate how you guys are running this podcast and the questions you're asking and the platform that you've created. So I'd be happy to come back anytime. And hopefully we can connect in person one of these days too.
Dude, we got Train Hard Men's Club tomorrow morning, 6:30 before Thanksgiving. This will probably release next week. And then I'll let you know if you ever want to come down to the South Bay. But in the meantime, what's the best place? Is Instagram the best place for people to engage with you?
Yeah, for sure. Just go on to Instagram, slide in my DMs, and I'm happy to connect with people. And I still message a lot of people every day. So
perfect. Well, we'll make sure to put the link in the podcast show notes to check out Marcus Philly and everything he has going on. Marcus, we really appreciate you. Everybody listening, simple ask. If you enjoyed this podcast, share with a friend, add some value to others, leave the podcast a rating and review. Definitely helps us out. But most importantly, make sure you're training hard, keep getting after it. Hope you and your family are doing well.